our next guest was first elected into the Scottish Government in a 1992 campaign for Scottish independence as Deputy First Minister. Led the country through the COVID pandemic during her 9 years as First Minister of the country.
We are very delighted to have the former First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, join us in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning. Lovely
Good morning, Nicola.
Thanks so much for coming in to talk to us, of course, about your new book. Frankly, I suppose it's interesting because we see so many autobiographies coming through. There's a public perception of what people want, and congratulations to you on a very raw and I suppose vulnerable side that you've shown in this as well. From the shy girl to growing up in Ayrshire, you're so young at 16. Getting yourself into politics.
I was a bit weird as a teenager, obviously.
How did you find, what was it about politics as somebody, who was shy as a young girl growing up, decide to put yourself out there on that pedestal to people?
Yeah, I mean, that's a contradiction. I was really shy, really introverted, and yet I had this burning desire to do something to, help change the world. It's a bit of a cliche, but that's how I felt. I grew up when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister and unemployment was really high. There was a sense of hopelessness in the community I was growing up in, and I just burned with this rage about what Thatcher was doing, but also an ambition to change things, which took me into politics. What took me into the SNP and to support independence was this idea that Margaret Thatcher, people in Scotland didn't vote for her, and yet she was still implementing all these policies that were doing so much damage. And it seemed to me then, and it still seems to me now, that the way for Scotland to chart its own course is to be independent. So that's what drove that political ambition, and I've had an extraordinary and brilliant time in politics ever since.
And it was like you were so young when you became this activist, working in constituency offices, knocking door to door. You were doing your law degree along with that in Glasgow. The SNP stood for full independence, but eventually we got the gradualist form of devolution in Scotland. And when the Scottish Parliament was created, the very first year, there was very public anger over things like expenses, the cost of the Parliament itself. Over your first day, you all got these medals to be like, well done, and the public got really angry about things like that. With hindsight, do you think there was this degree of naivety around the politicians in Scotland about what the public would want?
I think there was. I mean, the vast majority of us elected to that first Scottish Parliament in 300 years had no experience of being in elected politics. There was also such a huge weight of expectation. People in Scotland had, yearned for a parliament of our own for so long, and I think there was this sense that almost by magic we would have a parliament and all of the ills of the country would be solved overnight. So looking back, it was maybe inevitable that the experience would take a while to catch up with the expectations, and then some silly decisions were taken in the early days. And I remember that time. I'd just been elected to Parliament, something I'd long wanted to happen. But I remember that time as being one of not being particularly happy and thinking, maybe politics isn't for me. And towards the end of that first term of Parliament, actually thinking I might step down and pursue different career path. I'm glad I didn't, because obviously I then went on to have the most amazing career and experiences along the way.
Well, because you do talk about that, the weight of this leadership, and one of your early highlights of your leadership was being part of that Independence Referendum in 2014. Which seemed to be on the crest of a wave, but unfortunately didn't go the way you wanted it to. And you talk about how it hit you so hard, in your home office. How difficult was that to
it was
shoulder?
An extraordinary thing to be part of. Back in 2014, and it's more than a decade ago now, although it doesn't seem that long ago, Scotland was alive with political debate. We were probably the most democratically engaged country on the world at that time, and there was a sense of optimism about the future, and there were also people who opposed independence, who were fearful of what that might mean, but there was a real sense of engagement, and the place was buzzing with debate. And again, there's this kind of contradiction. We came much closer to winning independence than many people would have predicted, probably including us at the outset of the campaign, but not close enough. And that was devastating because, I think in the final stages of the campaign, I really started to believe we might just pull it off, and we didn't. And ironically, some of the things that opponents of independence, fear-mongered about during the campaign, if we become independent, we'll be thrown out of the European Union, then happened because we didn't vote for independence. We lost European Union membership. So yeah, it was an amazing time in Scottish history, but one that didn't go the way I wanted. I believe fervently Scotland will be independent, and it feels very stuck just now, but I think it will happen much quicker than it feels possible right now.
During all that, you're deputy leader at the time, and we will get to Alex Salmond in a minute, but of course in the general election of 2015, you become the first minister, and it's kind of rock star status. Like, the whole world knew who Nicola Sturgeon was, and there's all these things that come with it. But you speak very openly, not only about the many times you think about resigning, about leaving politics, but also the misogyny you came up against during that time. And something I didn't expect was you to talk about a former colleague who had a nickname for you that was of a very derogatory nature. He worked in Parliament with you, and it was definitely meant to deride you, and it was said by people, he'd say it to people, and when you found out about it, like, you just went into your house, you bawled crying.
It was horrible. I mean, I won't sort of go into exactly, people can read it in the book, but it was, you know, he gave me this nickname, and it was an example of, you know, bullying of a sexual nature. And at the time, I was a young woman in politics. This was a member of Parliament of another party. But I kind of just thought at the time, this is something you have to put up with. It's just part of the cut and thrust of politics. But it really upset me, and it really impacted on me. And it actually wasn't until many years later, I was First Minister, and in the wake of the Me Too movement, the Scottish Parliament did this survey of staff and members, and there was a question in it. Have you ever been the victim of sexual bullying? And I was about to tick no. And then this whole episode came back to me, and I thought, that was sexual bullying. And I think it says a lot about our society that women go through these things and suffer these things, you know, on a regular basis. And yet it's so ingrained that we don't always recognise it for what it is: blatant sexism and misogyny. I didn't name this guy in the book because actually, you know, knowing what he's like, I think he would probably enjoy the notoriety. I'd like to think he will have, you know, seen the references to it and will now be reflecting on his behaviour. But unfortunately, I've got a feeling he's one of these guys that never will.
Doesn't care.
One person who is named a lot in the book is Alex Salmond. He was a mentor of yours.
He was.
In
the early part of my
days.
life, he was a hugely influential figure, somebody who impacted my life in a positive way, pushed me on and helped me overcome that shyness and lack of confidence that I had in my younger days. We then became this incredibly successful political partnership, you know, taking the SNP into government, you know, winning a landslide a few years later, bringing about the Independence Referendum. So I've tried in the book not to rewrite history and to give him due recognition for the impact he had on my life and the impact he had on Scotland. But then, obviously, you know, allegations were made about him, and our relationship broke down because, I guess, I didn't respond to that in the way that he wanted me to.
You said, and this is before certain allegations, but this was when you became First Minister and he was gone from politics. I didn't realise it then, but this decision made the breakup of one of the most successful partnerships in modern British politics all but inevitable. More than a decade later, and even after his death, the aftershocks from it are still reverberating, because that's how central you were to kind of the Scottish project. Yeah. And globally, you put Scotland on the stage.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, we did that as a partnership for so long, and then obviously I became First Minister and led the country myself. Alex obviously no longer with us, and you know, there was part of me thought I shouldn't talk about this in the book because of that. But he, right up until he died, was, you know, he could never honestly reflect on his own behaviour. He was accusing others of a conspiracy against him, including me. So he was doing that right up.
The sexual allegations.
He was doing that right up until he died, and therefore I thought I had to set out, you know, what I considered to be the facts of the situation in my book. But I've done that with, I hope, without taking away from what we achieved together in past years.
We'll fast forward to the final few months of your tenure in office. I suppose was highlighted massively over the backlash of the trans rights legislation. Having extremely powerful women, likes of J.K. Rowling, come out in opposition to you, the backlash, I can imagine it was extremely difficult time for you to be the leader in that, and you actually speak about it in hindsight, you maybe wish you hit the pause button on what you're doing at
I mean, the
time.
debate became so polarised, so toxic, and it continues to be to this day, that of course I look back and think, could I have, I guess, done things differently to avoid that, maybe taken a step back and not given up on trying to progress the issue, but said, can we do it, you know, in a way that is less divisive? I'm not sure that would have worked, but, you know, possibly I should have tried. You know, the interesting thing about this is that we weren't doing something in Scotland that was groundbreaking. This was legislation that's actually been on the statute book here in Ireland for a long time.
2015,
yeah, and had cross-party support. It became, though, as we progressed through this, very, very contentious and very divided. I take the view, I'm a feminist. I've fought for women's rights all my life, will continue to do so. But I also think it's important to stand up for the rights of a very stigmatised minority. And I don't think these two things are in conflict.
You decided to step down in 2023. And then a series of events happened, which of course you talk about in the book. Your husband, Peter, who was chief executive of the SNP, who had been in charge of Alex Salmond's office. That's when you first met him, when you were a young woman. He was arrested on charges of embezzlement, and you yourself ended up being arrested a few weeks later. There was an awful lot of accusations that that's why you had stepped down, that you knew that this was coming. You have been cleared of all these charges. What has this been like to live with in a legacy that is now hung around your neck? Yeah,
I mean, it's been really tough for the last couple of years. I mean, obviously I can't talk about the substance of any of this because it's still, you know, live proceedings, not affecting me, obviously. But it was really tough. I mean, I think, you know, anybody who goes through something like that is, you know, has this cloud of suspicion, knowing, as I did, that I had done nothing wrong is a tough thing to go through. And, you know, obviously I wish that hadn't happened. But looking back on it now, you know, it's made me a stronger person. It's given me, I guess, a greater appreciation for what's important in life. And, you know, now that I'm out the other end of that myself and can look back on it, I know that I've learned a lot about myself. So the book doesn't shy away from some of these challenges and tough things I've gone through, but fundamentally at its heart, I think the book is a story of resilience and overcoming adversity.
And how difficult it can be, life in politics as well.
Yeah.
You talk a bit about other politicians that you've met and come across. Donald Trump is one that you had a 10-minute phone call with. I
think I described it in the book as like waking up from a bad acid dream when I come off that telephone call.
The most absurd moment of your premiership. I think you talked about that as well. And we also saw you're in Dublin at the moment. You're with Leo.
I had coffee with Leo. I mean, Leo and I got on really well when he was Taoiseach and I was First Minister. So, yeah, we're both out of office now. So we had a very chilled coffee yesterday afternoon talking about how nice life is after politics.
Leo's one name to drop, so was Donald Trump. How about Sean Connery? You speak very well, Nicola.
Oh, yes.
That got something to do with Sean Connery.
In my younger days in politics, I once had the absurd experience of being in a room alone with Sean Connery where he gave me, I guess, elocution lessons. He tried to teach me how to deepen my voice, I suppose, to give more gravitas in interviews, which involved pacing up and down a room with a piece of paper between my teeth. And the trick is, when you're doing an interview, you should imagine you've got a piece of paper between your teeth and it deepens your voice. It's not something I've put into practice very often. It's not easy to do when you're being grilled by interviewers. But anyway, it was a fun experience.
We'll try that.
We'll
try that later on.
Secret to it. Wow.
Just very quickly, because this is... I've read a lot of political memoirs over the year, and you're kind of like, you know, on the 28th night. This does feel different, and it's not blowing smoke, because you do talk about... I'm not just talking about anxiety and all that kind of stuff, but the amount of, like, just the self-doubt that you felt, which I suppose looking in from the outside, we're all going, that's Nicola Sturgeon. And it's very interesting. You also wrote incredibly powerfully about an incident in your life of when you were pregnant and how you felt conflicted about being pregnant because you were so driven by work. That was what was important to you, and you thought, how would people react to a politician approaching 40 and a general election was coming up and people mightn't like this. It was 2010 and you said it was a different time. You ended up losing that baby. You had a miscarriage in a very when you were at a public function. You blamed yourself for it.
I felt a lot of guilt, and you know, there's a bit of me still carries that today, because I was so conflicted, you know, not knowing how it would go down in an election campaign and thinking about work more than the fact that I was pregnant with a baby, and then when I lost the baby, I thought, is this my punishment for not wanting it unequivocally? And I guess I told that story because I guess lots and lots of women go through experiences like that. Lots of women have miscarriages. I think society still treats miscarriage as if it's not a really big deal. It is a really big deal if you go through it. And I guess there'll be lots of women who feel that same sense of, was it something I did wrong that led to the miscarriage? And I like a lot of women's health issues, they're still shrouded in stigma and ignorance. And, you know, if I can play a very small part through my own experiences of trying to change that, then that's something I like to try to do.
Yeah, you named her as well, and it just strikes profoundly in the book. It really does.
Beautiful.
What's next?
Yeah.
Well, I'm promoting the book just now. I'm still in Parliament in Scotland until our election next year. I'd love to write more. I've got this kind of ambition. I don't know if I'll ever fulfil it, because I don't know if I've got the ability to fulfil it, but I'd love to write fiction. I'd love to write a novel. So, yeah, I might try my hand at that. But, you know, there's lots of issues I care deeply about, you know, care experience, kids, climate change, equality, Scottish independence. So I'm not going to stay quiet on these issues. There are other ways I'm looking forward to, you know, making a difference and having my voice heard.
A fiction book, could it be set in a chamber in a government office?
It would obviously, if the whole write what you know is right, then it would be a political thriller. I joked to somebody the other day, the problem is I'd want to murder too many people. There'd be a murder on every single page.
Very good.
And I will read
Excellent.
that. That sounds incredible.
Listen, congratulations. Thank you so much on an incredible career and, of course, a wonderful book.
Yeah, the book is called, frankly, it is fascinating. Thank you for letting us into your life. Nicola Sturgeon, thank you so much.